Sophia's thumb hovered over the screen, frozen. Her heart thumped in her chest like a jackhammer. She had just realized the unthinkable. The photo wasn't going to Olivia, not to her best friend. It had gone to Ethan Caldwell, her boss, the CEO, the man whose sharp gray eyes had already memorized every spreadsheet and meeting schedule in the company, and who now held in his inbox a private image she had never meant him to see. Her apartment, normally safe and quiet, felt suddenly too small. The lavender-scented couch seemed suffocating. The golden afternoon light no longer softened the edges of the world. It exposed her mistake in harsh relief. She stared at her phone, unable to move, unable to breathe as the reply appeared. "I believe this message was sent by mistake. Please be more careful with future communications. Have a good weekend, Sophia." A cold wave swept over her. The words were calm, controlled, professional, but beneath them she sensed a danger she couldn't define. No crude jokes, no angry words, no evidence of surprise, just precision, the kind of precision that could cut through careers. She sank onto the couch, letting herself breathe shallowly. Her mind raced, trying to understand. Why wasn't he furious? Why wasn't he reacting like any normal man would? Instead, Ethan Caldwell had responded like a chess master who had just captured a pawn, but whose next move was still hidden. Sophia's fingers trembled as she reread the message. "I believe this message was sent by mistake. Not obviously, not delete my number." As if there were room for doubt. And then the chilling line, "Be more careful with future communications." Protective, threatening, she couldn't tell. Every rational thought screamed, this is a disaster. Yet somewhere deep inside, a dangerous part of her, thrilled, curious, wondered what this all really meant. The weekend passed in a haze. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped, expecting another cold, controlled note from Ethan. And then Monday arrived. The office lobby felt bigger than usual, and every step toward her desk was measured. Her blazer, her cream blouse, her careful shoes, suddenly meaningless armor against the most intimidating man in Washington, D.C. "Good morning, Sophia." Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She froze. He stood there impeccably dressed, eyes scanning her as if weighing every detail, every hesitation. A simple greeting but charged, tension coiled in the air like a predator ready to strike. "I need you to review these contracts before the 10 a.m. meeting," he said, placing a folder on her desk. His fingers brushed hers for a heartbeat, electric, invasive, impossible to ignore. Sophia's throat went dry. Was this punishment or something else entirely? She swallowed, forcing a smile. "Yes, sir." Right away. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he leaned just enough to let the words slip past his lips, low, quiet, only for her. "Next time you're sending photos to friends, maybe double-check the recipient." The heat that shot through her body was inhuman, not humiliation this time. Not dread, something sharper, something electric. I apologize again," she stammered, unable to keep her hands from shaking. He cut her off, voice just above a whisper, "Don't apologize." Then he straightened and the air between them shifted. Professionalism returned, or did it? His gray eyes lingered longer than necessary, and for the first time, Sophia saw a glint in him she hadn't seen before. Curiosity, intensity, something dangerously personal. The rest of the morning was a blur. Every click of her keyboard, every movement down the hallway, every whisper of conversation in the office seemed magnified. Ethan was everywhere and nowhere, his gaze finding hers at the strangest moments. The power imbalance had never been so raw, so suffocating. By lunchtime, she barely touched her salad, her mind replaying the message, analyzing his tone, imagining the possibilities. Could he be thinking differently? Not just a boss, not just a man who controlled the company, but something more. Across the office, she saw him glance at her, subtle but deliberate. She froze, caught mid-bite. A part of her wanted to look away. Another part, the dangerous part, wanted him to see everything. Embarrassment, excitement, curiosity, fear, and a hint of desire. Every nerve in her body screamed with tension, anticipation, and dread. She knew one thing, the moment she had feared, the accidental, humiliating private exposure, was no longer private, and she didn't know if she was ready for the consequences. The question that hung over her like storm clouds: what would Ethan Caldwell do next? And worse, what if she secretly wanted him to answer in a way she didn't know she dared to hope for? Part 1 total, 1,018 words. This opens mid-crisis, establishes immediate power imbalance, public versus private tension, and a cliffhanger. Next step, Part 2 will show the flashback of her normal life before the photo, while gradually building the office dynamics, subtle rivalries, and underdog cleverness. Before the photo, Sophia's mornings had been quiet, measured, predictable. Her apartment in Arlington smelled faintly of lavender and coffee, and she kept her routines precise. A shower, a blouse, her planner open at the same page every day. She liked control, liked knowing what was coming. But none of that mattered anymore. 3 months ago, Ethan Caldwell had entered her life like a storm in a glass tower. She remembered her first day, sharp heels clicking against polished marble, her blazer crisp, her hands shaking as she passed the security desk. She had been so careful to stay invisible, to avoid drawing attention. Ethan had been a figure of authority she never dared approach, a man who inspired a mix of respect and fear. A single glance from him could freeze a room. And now he had her pinned in a web she hadn't even realized existed. The office in those early weeks had been a place of observation. She had noticed the way his steel-gray eyes cataloged everyone, how he spoke little but moved with precision. Every memo, every email, every meeting carried weight. Employees whispered about him, and the ones who faltered often left in weeks. Sophia, she told herself, was careful enough to survive. She had learned to anticipate his moves, to anticipate the rhythm of the company, and to keep her head down. Until that single thumb slip changed everything. The moment she realized the photo had gone to Ethan, she had felt panic like nothing else in her life. The office hierarchy, the invisible walls that separated assistant from CEO, had suddenly shattered. That private, embarrassing mistake had become a secret weapon and a threat all at once. And then there was Jordan Hayes, the new marketing intern, fresh-faced and unassuming, yet dangerously persistent. He had a charm that made him appear harmless, and Sophia had underestimated him at first. But when he casually commented on how people noticed the subtle ways Ethan watched her, she realized the office was far more aware than she had imagined. Every glance, every gesture had an audience, even when she thought she was alone. Sophia quickly learned to navigate this new minefield. She began using subtle cues to communicate with Ethan. A folder placed just so, a carefully timed question, a deliberate pause at his office door. These weren't flirtations. They were strategies, clever, invisible maneuvers designed to manage the tension without letting anyone else understand. Even Jordan, persistent as he was, had no idea the underlying chess match occurring right before his eyes. Ethan, for his part, responded with the same calculated intensity. He didn't lose control, he amplified it. Every subtle movement he made, his shoulder brushing hers, the lingering gaze, the way he spoke her name, was a silent assertion of dominance, a protective claim, a signal that he understood her mistake and had already decided how he would handle it. Sophia recognized the brilliance in it. He didn't act impulsively, he controlled the chaos. And in that control, he left room for her to play her own hand if she was clever enough to notice. The day Jordan had brought coffee to her desk uninvited, Ethan's subtle, possessive posture beside her had been unmistakable. "Sophia isn't available for social distractions," his voice had said without words. Sophia had nearly laughed at how obvious it was, yet the thrill of it, this unspoken alliance, this understanding between them, sent her pulse racing. The office had become a high-stakes stage, and she was no longer just a player. She was learning to maneuver, anticipate, and even influence the game. By the end of that first week, she had discovered how to turn embarrassment into advantage. When a colleague complimented her efficiency, she allowed just the faintest acknowledgement, letting Ethan notice the pride in her posture. When Jordan tried to offer help on confidential contracts, she gently deflected, knowing that Ethan's eyes were on her every move. Every interaction became a silent conversation layered with strategy, attraction, and power. Even small objects became part of the game. The binder she carried, the emails she sent, the subtle note placed on his desk, they all communicated information beyond words. She learned that a misplaced file or an intentional pause could send a coded message to Ethan, and he responded in kind, with eyes that seemed to see every intention, every hesitation. Sophia's personal life faded into the background as her focus shifted. She became fluent in the office's silent language, mastering the small but potent levers of influence and awareness. Each day, she watched Ethan as he moved through the company, controlled, commanding, precise. She realized that she wasn't just navigating embarrassment. She was learning how to be indispensable, how to become someone whose presence was noticed, whose competence was undeniable, and whose influence, subtle but strategic, could reshape the environment around her. But even as she gained mastery, the threat of exposure remained. Every glance from Ethan, every brush of hands in passing, reminded her that the photo wasn't just a past mistake. It was a catalyst, a key to unlocking a power dynamic she had never experienced. And every day brought new tests. A comment from Jordan, a curious observer at the reception desk, the ever-present chance that someone would misread a gesture and unravel the delicate balance she and Ethan maintained. By the end of the week, Sophia understood something profound. She wasn't just surviving in Ethan's world, she was shaping it. She was learning the rhythm of control and surrender, of observation and influence. The accidental photo had been the spark, but her intelligence, composure, and subtle daring had become the ignition. And all the while, Ethan's reactions, calculated, protective, intense, taught her that this wasn't a game he was willing to lose either. Every raised eyebrow, every lingering gaze, every quiet correction of protocol was a challenge, a claim, a promise. Sophia realized she was no longer just an assistant. She was an equal in a silent contest where embarrassment had become a weapon, strategy a shield, and desire a fire that neither could ignore. The office lights dimmed for the evening and Sophia returned home, exhaustion paired with exhilaration coursing through her. She had survived the embarrassment. She had survived the tension. And for the first time, she knew that the next moves mattered, and she would play them with precision. Because in this new world, one sparked by a single mistake, powered by observation, and amplified by desire, Sophia had learned that mistakes could become leverage, embarrassment could become power, and a single accidental message could change everything. Sophia arrived at the office Monday morning with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt before. The previous weeks had transformed the ordinary walls of Caldwell Consulting into a labyrinth of observation, strategy, and tiny victories. She passed Olivia at reception with a polite smile, though her mind was elsewhere. Today felt different. She could feel eyes on her, not just Ethan S., but others in the office, waiting for a sign, an action, a misstep. And then she saw him. Jordan Hayes, leaning casually against the counter with that infectious smile, looking harmless yet far too confident. He caught her glance and offered a small nod, the kind that carried subtle challenge. Sophia returned it cautiously, aware of Ethan's steel-gray gaze following her from across the office. Jordan's presence had become a problem, harmless in appearance but persistent, curious, and observant. He asked questions that could have been answered by anyone else. He lingered too long in passing conversations, and Ethan had noticed, more than noticed. "Good morning, Sophia." Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. She turned, and there he was, walking with that effortless authority that seemed to bend the space around him. His eyes lingered on her just a fraction too long, subtle, controlled, but impossible to ignore. The air around him was electric, even in the crowded office. "You look ready for the day," he said, placing a folder on her desk. Their fingers brushed just barely, but it sent a current up her arm. Sophia's stomach knotted. She had learned quickly that even the smallest touch carried meaning. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said, voice steady, though her pulse raced. He leaned just enough for her to hear, low and quiet. "I noticed Jordan's interest yesterday. Be careful who you allow into your orbit." The words were controlled, professional, yet possessive, protective, almost primal. Sophia realized with a rush of heat that Ethan's attention was no longer just professional. She had inadvertently sparked something inside him, something that no spreadsheet, no meeting, no office protocol could contain. Throughout the morning, the office became a stage. Jordan asked innocuous questions, delivered coffee with casual charm, and lingered near her desk under the guise of small talk. Sophia deflected with professional composure, all while Ethan's gaze followed her movements like a predator tracking its target. She noticed subtle things. The way Ethan's knuckles whitened on his coffee cup when Jordan approached, the slight tightening of his jaw when the intern lingered too long. He didn't intervene overtly, yet his presence alone shifted the balance of the room. Sophia felt a thrill at the silent choreography of power, tension, and observation. By mid-afternoon, Ethan had summoned her to his office. "We need to review the Morrison contracts before tomorrow," he said, tone calm, hands resting on his desk. But the calmness was a mask for the undercurrent of intensity beneath. Sophia set her bag down carefully, noting the slight flare of his nostrils, the way his eyes tracked every movement. Jordan had tried to volunteer help earlier, but Ethan had already claimed Sophia's attention without a word. Every gesture was subtle, almost invisible to others, but Sophia knew. She could feel it. The office had become her arena, and the rules were no longer written in spreadsheets but in glances, touches, and silent declarations. The afternoon stretched into evening. They worked in silence, side by side at the desk. Every brush of her arm against his shoulder, every shared glance charged the room. Sophia realized she was learning the art of leverage, of controlling what was seen and unseen. She had survived embarrassment, survived curiosity, survived observation, and now she was turning it to her advantage. At one point, a stray paper fell to the floor. As she bent to pick it up, her hand brushed his. Just once, but the spark it created was undeniable. Ethan's eyes met hers, brief, intense, conveying more than words could. "This isn't just about work." Later, as the office emptied, Sophia noticed Ethan didn't leave immediately. He moved behind her chair, hands resting lightly on the desk edges. His voice low, almost a growl. "Do you understand how much power you have in your hands? Every decision, every glance, every subtle action shapes what happens next." She swallowed, aware that he was talking about more than contracts. The tension was no longer just professional, it was personal, emotional, strategic. Every move she made was being read, analyzed, weighed. And she realized with a mix of thrill and fear that she had grown into her own power, that this mistake, this accidental photo had transformed her. The door creaked. Both turned slightly, alert. It was only the cleaning staff, oblivious to the silent game taking place. When the hallway cleared, the intensity returned. Sophia looked at Ethan, realizing something she hadn't fully admitted before. She didn't just survive this world, she thrived in it. And she could see that Ethan's own restraint, his controlled possessiveness, only fueled the challenge. As she prepared to leave, he stopped her with a single glance. "Tomorrow we escalate, not in front of anyone, not yet, but I want you ready." Sophia nodded, understanding perfectly. She felt the weight of anticipation, the rush of adrenaline. This wasn't just a boss noticing an assistant. It was a subtle battle of influence and desire, a silent game where only the most perceptive could play. And she was ready to play. Outside the office, the crisp evening air hit her like a promise. The city lights of Washington, D.C. flickered through the tall buildings, but all Sophia could see was the game board inside Caldwell Consulting, the power dynamics, the unspoken rules, and the single man who held her attention like no one else could. For the first time, she realized something vital. Embarrassment had become leverage. Curiosity had become strategy. Desire had become power, and she intended to master all three. The office was quiet when Sophia returned to her desk the next morning. The sun had barely breached the horizon, and most employees had yet to arrive. She adjusted her blazer, straightened her notes, and tried to focus on the Morrison contracts Ethan had assigned the night before. But she couldn't. Not fully. The weight of yesterday's subtle encounters hung in the air. Jordan had lingered again in passing, smiling that disarmingly innocent smile, unaware that he was a catalyst, a mirror reflecting the tension between Sophia and Ethan. She caught herself pausing mid-typing, imagining how Ethan's eyes had narrowed when Jordan offered unsolicited help. And then he appeared. Ethan Caldwell, standing just beyond the threshold of her desk, hands casually crossed, yet radiating control, his presence making the air denser. She felt it immediately, every nerve alive. "Good morning," he said, voice calm but loaded with intent. That single greeting carried ownership, awareness, and the silent promise of attention. Sophia swallowed and nodded. He didn't linger for pleasantries. Instead, he placed a single small silver key on her desk. She froze, picking it up, reading the weight of it as if it carried significance beyond its metal. "This," he said quietly, leaning slightly forward so she could hear, "opens the archive room in the basement. I need you to reorganize some sensitive files today. By yourself. No interruptions. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, but the words sounded hollow to her own ears. "By yourself," he said. Not because she couldn't handle help, because he wanted control over who saw what, who touched what, and what energy moved through that room. Sophia's fingers brushed the key, and she realized this wasn't just a mundane task. This was a test of composure, intelligence, and subtle power. And she accepted it, inwardly thrilled. The elevator to the basement was cramped, forcing them close. The scent of his cologne, spicy, unmistakable, was immediate and distracting. Her pulse quickened. "So," Ethan began, breaking the silence, voice low and calculated, "I noticed Jordan's persistence yesterday. Careful who you allow near your desk." Her throat went dry. I'm careful," she managed, though she knew he was testing her reaction. "Yes," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, "but perception matters more than intention. Others will act on what they think they see. You and I know the truth, but others don't." She understood immediately. This wasn't just about work. This was about stakes, observation, and territory. Every glance, every touch, every interaction was a move on a subtle chessboard, and Ethan was teaching her the rules. By the time they reached the basement, the room smelled of old paper, dust, and the faint metal tang of filing cabinets. The space was small, poorly lit, and perfect for controlled work, isolated, intense, and intimate in a professional way. Sophia started sorting files methodically, quarter by quarter, category by category. Ethan stood nearby, observing, not hovering, not touching. But his presence was palpable. Every time she shifted a box, her arm brushed his. Every time she bent to read a label, she caught his gaze. "You're efficient," he said, voice cutting the silence. "Precise, calculated, but I also see hesitation." She swallowed. "Hesitation." "Yes," he replied. "You're aware of being watched, and that awareness can be a tool or a distraction. Choose wisely." Sophia felt a thrill. He's training me, testing me, pushing me to be aware of power, influence, and strategy. She straightened, aware of every motion. Then the unexpected happened. Jordan appeared at the top of the basement stairs, holding a stack of papers he claimed had been misplaced. Sophia tensed, ready to deflect politely, but Ethan's presence alone altered the dynamics. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his gaze, sharp and cold, silently communicated, "Step back. This isn't yours to touch." Jordan hesitated, aware of the subtle but undeniable boundary. He handed the papers to Sophia, eyes flicking to Ethan, and retreated with a small, respectful nod. Sophia exhaled, heart still racing. That was the first public demonstration of the unspoken hierarchy she and Ethan had established. He had claimed her attention, her competence, and in subtle ways her presence. She could feel the satisfaction of control mingled with excitement. The afternoon passed in a mixture of methodical work and charged silence. Each time a hand brushed hers against a folder, a fleeting glance met hers from across the desk, or he leaned slightly to point out a label, the tension built in layers like coiled steel. Finally, as they finished organizing the last shelves, Ethan stepped closer than usual. The dim light caught the angles of his face, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, and the gray steel of his eyes that seemed to see every calculation she had made, every thought she had hidden. "Good," he said, voice low. Everything is as it should be. Her chest tightened. That single acknowledgement carried weight beyond words, approval, attention, and a subtle declaration of territory. Sophia realized then how far things had shifted. She was no longer just a cautious assistant. She was a player in a silent, strategic game, one where embarrassment had become leverage, observation had become power, and desire had become a weapon neither of them could ignore. As they exited the basement, the elevator ride back up was quiet, electric. She dared to ask, her voice trembling slightly. "What happens next?" Ethan's gaze softened, intensity still burning in his eyes. "Next," he said, leaning just close enough for the heat from his body to reach hers, "we define the rules. And you, Sophia, will decide which boundaries you're willing to cross." Her pulse raced. She nodded, understanding that this was more than contracts, more than files, more than office politics. The stakes had shifted, the game had begun, and every move from this point forward would shape the future of their relationship, personal, professional, and strategic. As she returned to her desk, the office lights glowing softly around her, Sophia smiled faintly. She had survived the embarrassment. She had survived observation. She had even survived subtle rivalries. And now she understood. She wasn't just participating, she was thriving. The first moves of their silent, high-stakes dance were complete. But the real escalation, the private payoffs, the moments that would define both of them were just beginning. The office was nearly empty when Sophia received the discreet note. A small ivory envelope, precisely placed on her desk, bore her name in Ethan's familiar handwriting. Her pulse quickened as she picked it up. Every instinct told her to be cautious. Every thrill in her chest whispered curiosity, anticipation, and danger. Inside was a folded card and a single silver key. The card read, "Sophia, Archive Room, Basement, 3:30 p.m. Bring only yourself, E." Her fingers trembled as she traced the elegant handwriting. This wasn't just a work task. It was a test, a challenge, a private escalation in a game she was only beginning to understand. She spent the afternoon reviewing contracts with unusual focus, each keystroke a calculated diversion, every glance toward Ethan measured. He had been unobtrusive in meetings, yet present in subtle ways, an almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, a glance catching hers just long enough to ignite tension. When 3:30 arrived, she descended to the basement. The metallic scent of old files mingled with the faint tang of dust. The dim light made shadows dance across the shelves. Sophia felt her pulse in her throat as she entered, the key heavy in her palm. Ethan was already there. His posture relaxed, but his gaze was sharp. He didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch, letting her feel the full weight of the room, the tension, and the stakes. "Good," he said finally, voice low, controlled. "You understand the task." "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, though her stomach twisted. He didn't correct her, but his presence pressed in. Each time she moved a box, her arm brushed his shoulder, an almost accidental touch that made heat pool at her core. Each glance exchanged was an unspoken conversation, a test of composure and awareness. Halfway through, Jordan appeared briefly at the basement door, claiming to have a misplaced document. Ethan's hand tightened slightly on the shelf beside her. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just territorial. Jordan's enthusiasm faltered under that unspoken command. He handed Sophia the papers and left, unaware that he had just become part of their private stage of power and tension. As the last boxes were filed, Ethan stepped closer. The space between them felt charged, intimate, a delicate tension that blended authority and desire. "You've done well," he said softly, "but I need to know something. Are you aware of the control you have here, not just over tasks, but over perception?" Sophia swallowed. I try to be precise, aware of others' expectations." He tilted his head, eyes darkening. "Awareness can be a tool or a distraction. Use it wisely. Remember, influence is measured not in words, but in what others do in response to your presence." Her pulse quickened. Every brush of his sleeve, every shared glance, was another lesson in subtle power. Finally, as she finished the last shelf, Ethan stepped even closer. He held out his hand, brushing hers lightly as he passed her the silver key. The gesture was casual, yet loaded with meaning, ownership, trust, and claim. The afternoon concluded, but the real tension remained as they rode the elevator back to the office. Sophia dared to ask, her voice low. "What happens now?" Ethan's gray eyes held hers, intensity burning beneath the calm. "Now," he said, "we define boundaries, personal and professional, and you, Sophia, will choose which ones to cross." The stakes had shifted, the game had changed. Embarrassment had become leverage, observation had become influence, desire had become power, and both of them knew it. Later that evening, when the office was empty, Sophia found herself alone with her thoughts at her desk. She replayed every glance, every touch, every silent message they had exchanged over the past weeks. She realized with a mix of fear and exhilaration that the first private escalation had been a test, and she had passed. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous part of her whispered, what comes next could change everything. Because the silver key wasn't just a key. It was a symbol, access, control, trust, and the promise of escalation. The ivory envelope wasn't just a note. It was a challenge. And in that challenge lay the first true payoff, the intimate, psychological, and emotional victory of navigating embarrassment, desire, and power together. As she left the office, Sophia's heart raced, a mix of dread and thrill coursing through her. The corridors were empty, the hum of computers fading into silence. Yet she felt the weight of observation, the unspoken claim Ethan had made, and the knowledge that their private game was far from over. This was the first payoff, subtle but profound, the recognition that she could hold her own, even in the most charged environment, and that Ethan had noticed. That acknowledgement, that validation, was intoxicating. And as she stepped into the night air, the city lights reflecting her own racing thoughts, she knew one thing. The next moves would be decisive, and nothing, neither observation, embarrassment, nor desire, would be accidental again. The morning of the engagement announcement was electric. Sophia arrived at Caldwell Consulting with her heart racing, knowing that today everything would shift from secret tension to undeniable reality. The office seemed smaller, brighter, somehow heavier with anticipation. Even the hum of computers felt like a countdown. She found Olivia at reception, who looked at her knowingly, eyes sparkling. "Something's happening today, isn't it?" she asked with a teasing smile. Sophia swallowed, forcing a professional smile. "Just paperwork, mostly." But she could feel Olivia's gaze catching on her left hand. Already, the subtle hints of change were spreading. Ethan appeared at her desk moments later. Impeccable as ever, suit perfectly tailored, eyes that burned with intensity, but today there was something more, a quiet, controlled excitement. He held a small velvet box in his hand, subtle, but the kind of object that carried more weight than any contract, any folder, any memo. He didn't speak immediately. Just placed the box gently on her desk and locked eyes with her, letting the tension stretch long enough that her pulse raced faster. "Open it," he murmured, voice low, controlled. Every word carried power, desire, and a promise. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside rested a solitaire diamond ring, simple but dazzling, timeless, perfect. Her breath caught. This is real. This was more than a game, more than a private escalation in the basement, more than stolen moments and whispered glances. This was public declaration, tangible, irreversible. Before she could speak, Ethan knelt, capturing her hand gently, and looked at her as if memorizing every detail of her face. "Sophia Bennett," he began, voice strong, resonant, "will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. She felt the weight of the last 6 months, the accidental photo, the tension, the secret glances, the silent tests, the subtle battles with observation and desire, all leading to this moment. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The office erupted. Olivia squealed from reception, colleagues gathered, whispers of shock and awe filling the room. Jordan smiled broadly, clapping, acknowledging the inevitable, yet genuinely happy for her. Every glance from Ethan was now public ownership, protective, tender, and possessed, but tempered with love. Sophia looked at him, hands still trembling on the velvet box, and realized the truth. The photo she had sent by mistake had been the spark that ignited something far bigger. What began as embarrassment had become irrevocable love, strategic, intense, and transformative. Later that evening, they stood together at the small, intimate garden ceremony they had planned. Only 50 guests, carefully chosen, yet the stakes felt enormous. Every look Sophia gave Ethan, every touch of his hand on her back, every fleeting glance of acknowledgement carried the history of 6 months compressed into every heartbeat. Ethan's voice carried over the quiet crowd. 6 months ago, a single moment, a mistake brought us together. It was the beginning of a journey neither of us could have predicted. Sophia turned a slip of a thumb into courage, into presence, into partnership. Today, we acknowledge what started in private, in tension, in challenge, and celebrate it publicly. Sophia's vows reflected her own journey. I sent a photo to the wrong number, she began, voice trembling but clear. And yet, that mistake brought me the most important person in my life. Ethan, you taught me courage, trust, and love that's worth every risk. The rings were exchanged. Their lips met, and the crowd erupted in applause, laughter, and tears. The tension, the games, the observation, the stolen moments, all converged into this single perfect payoff. Even after the ceremony, moments alone with Ethan were electric. He traced the outline of her hand, fingers brushing the ring, eyes locking with hers. That photo, he whispered, was the beginning of everything real, everything powerful, everything worth fighting for. Sophia smiled through tears, and I wouldn't undo it for the world. The subtle battles, the unspoken strategies, the office rivalries, the tests of composure, all of it had led here. The accidental embarrassment had transformed into personal power, mutual respect, and irrevocable love. As they danced alone under strings of lights in the garden, Sophia realized that the game had ended, but the partnership, the understanding, the unspoken communication, and the shared power would define the rest of their lives. A final glance at Ethan, a smile shared, and the lesson crystallized. Mistakes aren't always failures. Sometimes they're destiny disguised as error. Sometimes they're the spark that turns embarrassment into love, strategy into partnership, and risk into life-altering reward. Sophia looked at the ring, then into Ethan's eyes. No regrets. Not one, he said, pulling her close. Not a single one. And under the stars, surrounded by quiet light, laughter, and the faint scent of spring flowers, Sophia knew the truth. Every misstep, every accidental exposure had been exactly what they needed to find where they truly belonged.